Welcome, everyone, to this 28th session of the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change virtual side event. My name is Neda Salmanpour. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Global Peace and Prosperity Forum, the organization hosting this event. We live in turbulent times on the cusp of several crises in an era of tipping points and major transitions. The scientific evidence is now overwhelming. On current trends, the world is rapidly depleting the stability and resilience of independent systems, our global commons. Destabilized global commons function as a threat multiplier. They amplify displacement, migration, and conflict. We now need to realize that healthy and resilient Earth systems, our global commons, are at the heart of our health, security, and prosperity, and we must work together to manage them responsibly. The global commons comprise key biophysical systems with 9 planetary boundaries. 6 out of the 9 planetary boundaries have now been transgressed, putting our shared health and prosperity at risk. Science has shown us that human extractive and polluting activities exceed the regeneration rate of natural systems. New estimates published in the journal Nature Climate Change show we could cross the threshold outlined in the Paris Agreement of 1.5 Celsius within just 6 years. We are therefore in a state of emergency. Given the gravity and urgency of preserving the health of the planet, we need to fast-track decarbonizing our energy, industry, and transport, adopt circular economy, make cities and communities more sustainable, and transform our food, land, and ocean use systems so that we can live sustainably within planetary boundaries. So how do we break the cycle of overconsumption and waste that's placing the Earth system at risk? What transformative model would ensure a just and equitable transition? How do we ensure every person has the means to lead a life of dignity, community, and opportunity while we hold the integrity of this delicately balanced living planet? The economy is ultimately our relationship with each other and with the living world. We must decide whether we want that relationship to be based on extraction and exploitation or on reciprocity and care. I am delighted that today we are joined by visionaries who will provide their insight to these most pressing questions. Our format today is that we are privileged and delighted to have 2 keynote speakers. The first will be Mrs. Sandrine Dixon de Clèves, co-president of the Club of Rome, and then the second will be Mr. Philippe Lambert, member of the European Parliament. May I now introduce Sandrine. Sandrine Dixon de Clèves is co-president of the Club of Rome. She divides her time between leading the Club of Rome, advising, lecturing, and facilitating difficult conversations. She currently chairs the European Commission expert group on economic and societal impact of research and innovation, and sits on the European Commission mission on climate change and adaptation. She also sits on several non-executive and advisory boards, including Imperial College London, and is a senior associate and faculty member of the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. Sandrine was recognized most recently by Reuters as one of the 25 global female trailblazers and by Greenpeace as one of the 30 most influential women across the globe, driving change in the low-carbon economy and promoting green business. I'm delighted that Sandrine is joining us today, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Neda. Can you hear me properly? Because I'm here in Dubai.
I can hear you, so I hope everyone else can, yes.
Lovely, lovely. So I am here, believe it or not, in the Opera House and in a small room on the side. So I'm hoping there isn't too much echo. I just wanted to indicate how important this conference is and the fact that as you opened up, we are effectively in the midst of probably the greatest wake-up call we've ever had. Now, what's interesting for us at the Club of Rome is, of course, if people had heeded our alarm already in 1972 when we published the limits to growth, we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in. But we have reached a series of tipping points, and we're leaving the safe operating space, as you so indicated, of our Earth systems through these multiple crises. For me, climate, COVID, and conflict are making our compound effects of the world tipping points getting graver and graver from a social and environmental perspective. And that basically means that we have to have an economic reset. We need to think through the economy that we need for today's problems, an economy that services people, planet, and prosperity at the same time. And of course, an economy that ensures stability and peace. So what we have done recently, building on the very important points that we had in the limits to growth, and taking into consideration that we are in the 50th year of the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the limits to growth, is to start to think through actually what is, and I'm trying to move forward a little bit and think in terms of the thinking that we have here, but what are the key tipping points that are before us where we can actually put in place that new economic system? What's interesting is even the World Economic Forum has shown us that the 2 key years that are coming before us, as well as the next 10 years, we will see that the most important risks are both social and environmental. So what we've done through our system dynamic modeling, which was started through the limits to growth and actually put forward some key scenarios, through our Earth 4 model, we've actually been able to show that actually it is the social tipping points which are the most important tipping points that we now have before us. In fact, what we've seen, and as you opened up and talked about the planetary boundaries, is that the speed and scale of reaching a life within the planetary boundaries will depend on the speed and scale in which we eradicate poverty and inequality. What our work has shown through our welfare index and also our social tension index is that because we are seeing a decrease in well-being across the globe, in particular in the West, is that we actually will have an increase of social tension. And an increase in social tension means obviously that we will have less peace and more instability. So we have to start thinking through what then are the governance frameworks that we need, the economic frameworks that we need, and the financial architecture that we need to enable us to live within a new peaceful paradigm, but also a prosperous paradigm. We've taken into consideration a variety of different economic models. And for us, really, the North Star is ensuring that we increase the well-being for most people on the planet. So we've looked at the donut model, we've looked at the green growth model, we've looked at the beyond growth model and taking into consideration beyond GDP indicators, which place a value, for example, on natural capital and environmental capital alongside economic progress, not necessarily growth. But in particular, we've taken the point that we need to shift from an extractive economy. We need to shift from an economy that only consumes on the back of people and growing poverty, and come back to an economy that places a value on well-being. To do that, we've actually looked at 2 key scenarios. The first scenario is the too little, too late scenario. It's the scenario which is actually demonstrating today's business as usual. It means that technology does not service people or planet. It means that actually we are not shifting our systems, our economic system and our financial system, to put in place that value and that purpose-based economy that's so necessary. But if we move into the giant leap scenario, we will see actually that we can focus on 5 key turnarounds that will cost us about 2 to 4% of GDP per annum. And let me remind everyone that actually, if we look at the costs from climate change and growing instability, that will be about 5% per year. So it is cheaper to start to build resilience within our economy and shift towards a well-being economy. And those 5 turnarounds are the following. Taking into consideration poverty eradication, ensuring that we decrease inequalities exponentially, which means taking into consideration proper wealth distribution, taxation regimes, and universal basic dividend regimes that will enable people to live above $6.95 per day in terms of their wage, and ensure that they are making between $10,000 to $20,000 per year in terms of their annual income. It also will mean that we have to tax the wealthiest multinationals. And right now, if you look at what's happening across the globe, we have oil and gas companies that are making a profit of $2.8 billion a year. By the way, being here in Dubai, where everyone hailed the loss and damage fund of only about 500 million, you can see how ridiculous that is in terms of being a real drop in the bucket in comparison to not only the money we have from fossil fuel subsidies, but the profits that are being made on the back of energy poverty growth across the globe. The other three key turnarounds are the empowerment of women, because we know that if we give women access to education and if we enable women to be part of our decision-making structures, then we will actually start to have a shift within most of our economies, including our southern economies, around actually bringing down population growth, but most importantly, a very different type of decision-making structure. And then we look at the two key turnarounds, which of course everyone talks about, which is the transformation of our energy systems towards a multiplier effect of moving towards decarbonization, electrification, and ensuring actually that we double energy efficiency and our investments across the board. And then of course, shifting towards regenerative agriculture and sustainable agricultural projects that will make sure that we actually move away from industrial agriculture. So I'm going to finish with this by saying that what's interesting is that we now have serious consideration for the proposals that we have on the table in terms of an Earth for All or a well-being economy. We know we already have 5 well-being economy governments across the globe. We know that across the globe, we also have serious consideration now for new indicators that place a value on natural capital and on human capital. And we know that if we do not move forward, we will not be responding to the needs of people. So I'll close with this statistic. 74% of G20 citizens have indicated that they are ready to move towards a well-being economy. I think that is an indicator enough to show us that it is time to move from this extractive economy that does not service people, planet, and prosperity, that includes and ensures that we will have growing social tension, from an economy that actually benefits people and planet and prosperity at the same time by moving towards well-being. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that fantastic beginning. I'd like to now invite Mr. Lambert to speak. Mr. Philippe Lambert was born in Brussels, Belgium in 1963. He holds a degree in applied mathematics from the Université Catholique de Louvain. From 1987 to 2009, he held various commercial and managerial positions at IBM. In June 2009, he was elected to the European Parliament for the first term, during which he devoted much of his time to the reform of banking and financial regulation. In 2014, he was re-elected as MEP, and a month later he was appointed co-president of the Greens EFA group. After 5 years of working to strengthen the position of the Greens inside and outside the European institution, he was re-elected as leader of the Greens EFA after European elections in May 2019. In his third and final term as a member of European Parliament, he is determined to put the Greens at the centre of the European political stage and is leading the fight for an ambitious Green Deal, resolute in the policies and tools needed to tackle the global polycrisis. If I can invite Mr. Lambert to speak.
Yeah, sure, you can invite me and I will even speak if you want. Well, I'm just back from a negotiation, and actually it's a bit connected to what we are talking about, because you may remember a few months ago we had the Beyond Growth conference in the European Parliament, and indeed there was a lot of energy there in the hemicycle to really see a paradigm shift. But what I'm witnessing day in, day out is not exactly that. So I might say that at the moment what we are witnessing is a backlash against the Green Deal, which is actually, how should I say, even an EPP politician the other day in a debate said that the European Green Deal was just the embryo of the change that we need to see. Having an EPP guy saying that is rather refreshing, but I think he would be an exception in his group. Indeed, and even that embryo is being fought against I would say, vehemently, if not violently, by the far right and the EPP and parts of the Liberals and the Social Democrats. So anything that has to do with respecting planetary boundaries is actively being fought against in the name of, well, our people have already a miserable life. They can't make ends meet. And so anything greening the paradigm would make life more expensive to them. And so if you don't want to make their lives even more miserable, so stop with that green ideology, because of course they portray or fight to respect planetary boundaries an ideological fight, whereas actually just respecting physics and chemistry and basic science, right? Now, an example of that is what we are witnessing right now, which is awfully important on European fiscal rules. As you know, a significant part of the funding of the transformation will be public, not 100% of it, but a significant part of it. And if you want to fund it, of course, you may say, we defund other activities, typically education, health, and all the rest of it, which were deemed not so long ago during the pandemic as essential. That, of course, is not an option as far as we are concerned. You may say that you will fund the necessary public investment through additional taxes. Sandrine just mentioned the need to tax wealth. You have even right-wing economists saying that there's no way around this, that we will need to do that. But then those who fight against the Green Deal will say, no, we will not increase the tax burden. They mean actually on the rich, but actually they portray that as protecting the people on the street. And well, if you are not cutting, if you are not taxing, then the only way to fund this is through debt. And this is the latest news. We have a majority in the European Council, probably will measure that on Friday. And we will have a majority in the European Parliament. Well, we'll measure that next Monday to accept binding targets to reduce debt on an annual basis as of 2024. As if so, basically the premise is that the level of public debt is too high, and so the only way for public debt to go is downwards. And that has to start now. And interestingly, I like to refer to him because he's not especially a green economist. Olivier Blanchard, formerly chief economist of the IMF, is saying, guys, if we do what we need to do in terms of the green transformation, leave alone defense or whatever. I mean, the green transformation, we have to accept that in developed countries, the debt to GDP ratio is going to go up the next 20 years. So anyone who says it has to go down is basically saying, fuck the green transformation. Fuck the European Green Deal. Sound public finances, well, in their concept of sound public finances, will save us all from all the perils, be them Putin, climate change, and whatever. This is what we are facing. So we are facing what I like to call the zealots or the fundamentalists, the religious fundamentalists of austerity, and the backlash is pretty much there, with the support of a significant chunk of the left. Of the Social Democrats. Now, can you call them left? That's another question, but of the Social Democrats. I'm saying that you might say, well, that's a bit besides the point. I don't think it's besides the point, because that tells you a bit the atmosphere in the EU policy circles at the moment. Full speed backlash against anything that smells of the trend of the green transformation, because, well, this is led by woke ideologues who have no connection with the real world. Voilà, that's what I wanted to share. Now, the good news is that the negotiation session I was in has already ended, so I can stay a bit longer.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We look forward to your contributions further to this dialogue. I would like to now introduce our next speaker. Timothée Parik, is a researcher at the School of Economics and Management in Lund University, Sweden. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Clermont-Auvergne and Stockholm University. His dissertation in 2019, titled The Political Economy of Degrowth, explores the economic implications of the idea of degrowth. Tim is a lead author of Decoupling Debunked, Evidence and Arguments Against Green Growth, a report published in 2019 by the European Environmental Bureau, and the author of the French book Ralentir au péril, l'économie de la croissance, published in 2022. Tim.
Thank you very much, and hi everyone. Yeah, I mean, I want to make a few points. The first one being on the concept of green growth, a point I've been making, I think, repeatedly since the Decoupling Debunked report of 2019, and a point that is actually truer now than it was back then. I think every year that goes by, it makes it more difficult for people advocating that we can both further grow the economies of high-income nations and degrow their ecological footprints. I think by now we have enough scientific evidence to know that no country in the world, even the fastest, the supposedly greenest economies in the world, have managed to just lower their total ecological footprints. So that's important when we talk about this, to include not only greenhouse gases, but also all the other planetary boundaries. We use the concept of planetary boundaries, so we really have to, if you want to show that sustainable growth is possible, then you need to show that, growth can be absolutely decoupled from all environmental pressures. Everywhere, wherever these pressures happen, at a scale and pace that is sufficient to meet the return within planetary boundaries and forever, not only for 1 year, not only during an economic recession. Very often people just show numbers showing that, look, in Europe, there's been a very fast acceleration of greenhouse gases decrease. But like a lot of these decrees, you can just source to the pandemic and the global financial crisis, which actually is just rather an evidence that one of the most effective fail-safe way we have to just reduce our ecological footprint is to act on production and consumption. So that's the concept of degrowth, the way it has emerged in the early 2000s by people that had been, let's say, trying to find a new step after the limits to growth and more broadly objections to growth of the 1970s. So degrowth, that idea of downscaling production and consumption in high-income nations, where most of the ecological footprint is still concentrated. So, of course, when we start to speak about degrowth, that opens a lot of different questions. One of the conceptual difference I want to make here between three terms, the objection to growth, limits to growth, we've heard about, that's from the 1970s. Then there's the degrowth concept, which is a transition concept. So basically any country today that is in breaching its ecological boundaries, every country where ecological footprint is higher than the biocapacity of supporting ecosystems will have to undergo a certain downscaling of production and consumption unless they manage to make their growth sustainable. But I don't think that is just theoretically possible. So degrowth is transition. You can see it as some kind of macroeconomic diet to get back faster or to get back at all within planetary boundaries. And then we have this third term, not objection to growth, not degrowth, but post-growth or beyond growth, which is more of a destination concept. So I think, that describes, once we've done with the diet, the transition, what kind of system do we want to build? What kind of economy do we want to have? What kind of objectives do we want to be aiming for? And so here, once we understand the difference between these three, that also clarifies that we cannot too eagerly, jump into beyond growth and post-growth, because there is a step before, and that is degrowth. We cannot have well-being economies today in countries that function at an unsustainable scale. Or yes, we can have this well-being in these countries, but at the expense of either future generations, either vulnerable population, especially in the global south, or at the expense of non-humans and the rest of nature and the living world. So we have these steps that come in order. And once we realize this, I think that poses a very critical question towards capitalism as an economic system in the way it currently exists in most high-income countries in the world, so where we are trying to organize degrowth. And we have this contradiction between our current economic software, so capitalism, a system that is being organized around the accumulation of capital, one form of it being economic growth, another growth, let it be of income, for individuals, for profits, for companies, or GDP for governments, all the same, just this ideology of just growing money numbers over the years. And having several institutions, especially in place to accelerate, to optimize these monetary growth. So if we acknowledge the fact, for what I have explained before, that we cannot no longer have these growth, or actually we want to do the very opposite, degrowth toward a steady state economy, so degrowth towards post-growth, then that means we face the very urgent task of dismantling capitalism as an economic system, and as was previously said brilliantly by Sandrine, just inventing a new economic model that will be that we could describe as a post-capitalist.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to now introduce Patricia Heger is the Deputy Secretary General of the European Environmental Bureau and its Director for European Governance, Sustainability and Global Policies. In this role, she leads the EEB's work on sustainable development and environmental justice and follows intergovernmental processes at regional, global level, including the UN Environment Assembly. Patricia has been working as an advocate for environmental justice, human rights, and sustainable development for 20 years, mainly with NGOs in Europe and Asia. Patricia.
Thank you, Nida, and hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to this debate. And I first have to apologize because I was trying to answer a question on the Q&A already in writing, and I pressed the wrong button. So Lynn asked which ones are the 5 well-being governments. So I just wanted to share that these are Scotland, Wales, New Zealand, Iceland, Finland, and Canada. So it's actually 6. And there's a couple of other governments that don't yet belong to the Wellbeing Government Alliance, but that follow similar concepts. For instance, the government of Bhutan or Costa Rica, to mention some examples. So that these are really interesting to follow. So yeah, what I wanted to share is a bit our perspective from kind of the EB, so being a large network of environmental citizens organizations across Europe, and how we approach the question of the transformation of our economic systems from this, let's say, European angle. Obviously, that's not a secret. In Europe, we're living as though we had 2.8 planets because we consume too many natural resources here and globally, and we contribute to the destruction of the environment at home, but also in other parts of the world. And it's also not a secret that this that the exploitation of the resources is very much skewed in favor of those who are already rich, with literally hundreds of millions of people in less advantaged economies providing their services to high-income countries, while bearing most often the brunt of the worsening environmental conditions and unstable climate. But these kind of inequalities are also very much a reality in Europe. So if you look at the kind of these kind of famous figures of kind of, what percentage of the world's population is in charge of or is responsible for what percentage of emissions, the situation in Europe doesn't look so much different from the rest of the world. So basically the richest 10% in Europe emit more than the poorer 50% of the region. So that very much reflects the situation at the global level. So as an organization, we want Europe to recognize its responsibility to change our economies so that we can return within the planetary boundaries that we have transgressed, but of course also ensuring the basic needs and the social well-being of all. So in this work, we've been kind of trying to show the link between kind of the economic growth paradigm and how it's intrinsically linked to questions of environmental, social, and economic justice. Also trying to show that questioning GDP, questioning economic growth as the objective of our economic policy is not just about everyone getting less. It's actually about some getting a lot less, some a bit less, but also quite some more, given the very unequal distribution of kind of access to products and consumption also in our region. So we've been working at the European level first, on this question of kind of measuring what matters. How can we replace GDP as kind of the lead indicator? There have been some successes in that direction to kind of push the debate on alternative indicators, but obviously we're still far from replacing GDP as a lead indicator. I always like to give one example, which is still striking. I've been working quite a bit on measuring our progress towards the 2030 agenda and the SDGs, where Europe is obviously using GDP as one of its indicators to measure success. But there are also other indicators that are quite telling for the kind of perception of kind of what is economically wanted. And one of those examples is an indicator that's meant to tell us how good we are as global partners. And that indicator is the volume of goods that we import from the least developed countries, which basically means, if you want to put it a bit bluntly, the more cheap stuff we import from poor countries, so the more we grow our trade kind of with cheaply produced goods from the global south, the better we perform on the SDGs. And I think that's a quite telling example of wrong indicators. But we've also been trying to push debate beyond the indicator debate. For instance, trying to start a wider societal debate on, degrowth scenarios for certain sectors. I mean, the coal sector is a very obvious one, but then there's others like fast fashion or plastic production, to name a few. And to see, which sectors are, the growth sectors where we want growth, because we need more of, let's say, sustainable food or sustainable transport. And trying to link this debate very much with a debate on kind of social justice, as it is a smaller part of society which is driving kind of extreme consumption levels. And one of the weaknesses of the European Green Deal was the lack of integration of environmental and climate policies with social policies. So I think, maybe to kind of summarize what we've been trying to do, and it also ties in what Philippe and Timothy have already shared, is we've been trying to build kind of a wider coalition within civil society, with activists and with academics, to build the understanding of what the problem behind our growth dependence is, to, as Timothy has mentioned, to also kind of reveal that green and sustainable growth is a myth, that it's not happening, and that there's no scientific proof of it happening. Also trying to kind of, drive the debate around the European Green Deal still being a green growth strategy and not a strategy to overcome our dependence on growth, and trying to kind of show alternatives. And yeah, the decoupling debunked report, which Timothy has authored, has been the lead author of, was really one of the milestones, pushing the kind of beyond growth debate more to the forefront in Europe. And since then, I think we've seen, and that's kind of a success, but I also come to the challenges in a minute. Yeah, it has helped us to kind of bring this debate more to kind of, you know, a wider audience, and also to debates with, you know, the mainstream political institutions.
Thank you.
But yeah, okay.
Thank you very much. So we can go into more detail with the question now in the roundtable. If we can have everybody together now would be easy. But I would like to first, everybody I know, like they're taking time to be here with us today. Sandrine, there's several issues that, you know, are really pressing happening at COPs, and one of them is this issue, this proposal for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, which is asking the phase out of fossil fuels, and it's become so contentious at COPs. And we find this surprising because you know, obviously limits of growth report 50 years ago suggested this, that you know, fossil fuels should become obsolete, but the International Energy Agency also 2 years ago said that developing any new oil and gas fields would harm the chances of keeping global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And the IPCC have also reiterated this in their report recently. So please tell us what's going on at COPs.
Thank you so much, Neda. And actually, it's exactly why I will have to leave early, because I'm going to tell you a little bit how things have blown up, and also link this to what Philippe said, which was so important about how difficult it is still to even hold on to our European Green Deal. So let me maybe first start on that. I think that if, as Philippe has indicated, the pushback right now that we have, where entrenched power interests are holding on with dear life because they're seeing a change. They are saying that there has been a shift in public opinion, at least up until about a year or 2 years ago. And we could really start to feel that they were under pressure. And the way that is being translated is the way in which we're seeing the EPP, so the political right, holding on more and more to power, starting to demonstrate through a narrative of sufficiency and shifting towards a different economic model. Putting in place the European Green Deal is bad for citizens. This is actually going to make your life worse. Those of you who are suffering already from energy poverty, who are suffering from the inflationary effects, are going to have more and more difficult. We saw it with the nature protection law, and we're going to see it now with the European Green Deal. And I think this is really important, because this means that all of us who are working in this space need to hold on to a narrative that's going to be convincing, because we're losing right now, big time. And we can see it here in Dubai as well. Last week, we saw that Mary Robinson, who I'm working with on the Climate Governance Commission, and also who has pushed back the Sultan in a very public way, that actually fossil fuel phase out has to be the only result to come out of Dubai. We will not meet our emissions requirements. We will get nowhere near 1.5 degrees, and we already know we're off in terms of the trajectory if we don't eliminate fossil fuels and move towards a phase-out strategy. The European Union is the only, I would say, Western region right now that is supporting that very premise alongside some of the other high ambition countries, in particular the island states. Now, why is this so important in terms of what we're saying right now? Because the very essence of the extractive economy that we have today is the dependency that we have on fossil fuels. And if we see the pushback that we're seeing, the fact that, as I said, we've got the loss and damage fund that opened up this COP, 400 million, woohoo, in the midst of 2.8 billion profits per day from the oil and gas sector, again, on the back of energy poverty. And we can see that they are holding on to dear life to make sure, and the Saudis have already said, no, we are not going to accept a deal on fossil fuel phase out. We have the Americans that are hiding behind the Chinese, and we have other countries, India, etc., that are playing more around coal, and we talked a little bit about coal just now, rather than oil and gas. But what was really important and this is where I want to close and I want to make us reflect, is that even the science now is being called into question. So the remarks that we heard last week and that have been all over the news, and the work that I've been doing directly with Johan Rockström and other scientists has been to bring science back into the negotiations, bring the evidence back, because we heard from the Sultan and others that there is no scientific premise for actually getting rid of fossil energy. And so there was a letter that was published by more than 100 scientists yesterday. Working together, we were able to get this letter out, which clearly indicates that that is not true. It clearly indicates also that we need to be very careful around the way in which carbon removal is now encroaching on the discussion, as if that is the solution, rather than thinking about full abatement. So I'm going to leave it at that, but just to say that watch this space. This is the most heated space. And I think that as we move into a discussion around beyond growth, and I fully agree with Timothée, green growth doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. We have to move into a different scenario. But if we don't bring people on the journey, and that's why I said the speed and scale on living within the planetary boundaries is directly linked to inequality and poverty issues. It's equity that's going to count. We have to bring people on this journey. And right now they're scared because they are feeling the compound effects of climate and the Ukrainian invasion and other crises. And therefore we have to get much better at it as a community, working with politicians like Philippe and others to bring a multi-spectrum of multi-stakeholders, like we're seeing here, businesses that are coming together with politicians and others that are saying fossil fuel phase out is the first pillar to shift us away from an extractive economy towards a more well-being economy. But we need to convince people that it's not going to hurt them more than actually they're hurting now. And what does a just transition look like? And how can we ensure that our European Green Deal is a European green and social deal, so people don't push against it and don't fall into the trap of the fear mongering that the EPP is putting forward.
Thank you. Can I ask you, if you're going to jump off the and go somewhere else, can I ask you another question before? I mean, just while I have you here, I don't want to lose this chance. The other thing that, I mean, we talked about the loss and damage, and you did mention that they're making billions per day. Even the International Monetary Fund mentioned that the world spent 7 trillion on fossil fuel subsidies. And we know that the figures are out that they made, the fossil fuel companies made 4 trillion in profits last year. And we heard Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, say, well, if they keep 95% of their profits and just give us 5%, 200 billion for the loss and damage and the adaptation, that would be quite a lot of money to give, and it's not going to hurt them. So why aren't they doing it? What's the excuse? And we can see why they're pushing back, because they're making money, and on top of it, they're doing new expansion plans. We hear about other places. It's not phasing out what we have now. We're supposed to stop, but they're actually expanding their plans on fossil fuel. So, and we know that the science is there. We can see it happening to us everywhere. So
yeah, it is a bit sad to have to say this, but I do think that it is growing greed. How much is enough? How much growth is necessary, but how much profit is necessary for people to feel okay, and companies to feel okay? Let me give you a few statistics. Since 1978, CEO salaries in the United States have grown by 1,400%. Employee salaries have grown by 18%. Inflation has grown by anywhere between 20 to 30, and we know that, for example, in Argentina, it's going up to 200%. So, you know, how much is enough? And this is the question that we have to ask ourselves. How is it possible that governments are still not taxing the profits that are coming from oil and gas companies and redistributing them under some kind of global commons fund? Why is it that we do only have some patriotic millionaires, which, by the way, some of them are coming together, including Warren Buffett, who are saying, okay, we're going to pay our fair share, but so many others that are still evading taxes? and that governments are not actually putting in place the tax reforms that we need to ensure that we do tax not only the wealth of the wealthiest, but the wealth from the most wealthy multinationals. That needs to happen now, and that needs to happen by governments putting in place those taxation strategies that then go into funds that redistribute it. Now, some will say, and in particular, some of my colleagues in the US, if you have a corrupt government, then the government won't necessarily redistribute. So we need to realize that when we talk about innovation, for example, we have to innovate in terms of our governance systems. We have to ensure that we put in place the frameworks where leaders are becoming good leaders again, that they actually are having the power from a public sector perspective to put in place the frameworks that are necessary to capture those funds and then to redistribute, for example, through a universal basic dividend. The last key point, which I think is really important, is that I agree with you, we all need to hold those companies accountable. And we need to also hold our governments accountable for the fact that we continue to have perverse subsidies on our market, whether it be for industrial agriculture rather than regenerative agriculture, or whether it be for oil and gas. And that's fundamental. And maybe I'll just add the third point. Let us not underestimate how much some of our companies are transitioning. I sit on a series of corporate boards where I am flabbergasted at the level of conversation that is going on that would totally resemble our own. These are good CEOs who understand that they need to actually be companies that are servicing people's needs and the planet. In the electricity sector, for example, that are moving out of coal, like EDP, our Portuguese electricity company, where they have declared that by 2025, they will be almost 80% green and 100% by 2030, fully out of coal, putting in place just transition plans, skilling actually their workers so that they go into renewables and they have 100% turnover so that actually these workers are still working with them. We need to also talk about those companies that have drunk the Kool-Aid and have understood that this is the only way forward. We only talk about the bad guys and we forget to talk about the good guys that are actually part of the new economy and that are trying to do the right thing.
Thank you so much. It's been very helpful to understand, everything coming in together. Could I maybe ask Timothée now about, again, degrowth? I mean, people have worries about degrowth, that if they're going to go along with degrowth, the standard of living is going to drop, they're going to go into recession. But we see from like we've heard about the well-being economy, and the OECD made a study recently, and they showed that quarter of the population in the OECD, which is really 30 of the richest countries in the world, were suffering from mental health issues. They were recording high symptoms of anxiety and depression. And these are countries with high GDP. So obviously, having high GDP doesn't equate with being with well-being, with prosperity, the way people want it. So we've seen also degrowth saying that, well, you look at Spain and you look at Portugal, they have much better life expectancy than they have in the US. So that's not a thing to be worried about if you reduce your output, which is what degrowth is saying in advanced countries.
Yeah, exactly. So what we notice is that after a certain threshold of GDP per capita, economic growth decorrelates. So it's from indicators of quality of life. And this is easy to understand because gross domestic product is just a volume-based indicator. So it just basically tells you, the quantity of money that is going around, but it doesn't tell you what is being used to produce, and it doesn't tell you, who's using the product. And so, as Sandrine was making it clear, there are certain periods of time and places where you can have GDP growth at the same time of having an increase in poverty. And I mean, those are not exceptions. These has been the case for the last decades in France. So, the GDP is getting bigger. And, there are more and more poverty, more and more people in the street, more and more just, undernourished people, which is not normal. in a supposedly high-income developed country. So here, when we think about this, like the fear we have is in degrowth is actually symmetrical to the obsession we have in growth, because the same thing, like growth is an aggregated phenomenon. But if, you know, everything around you increase, but your particular situation doesn't improve, let's say you're in the bottom 30% lowest income in a country, then, you know, quality of life is not increasing for you. And that's the problem, because you are the portion of the population that should be benefiting from the extra economic activity. You know, if an extra building is being built, it would make sense from a well-being perspective that that building is being used for the person that needs it the most. So here we also have an economic system, because of its a very high level of wealth and income inequality, that is just not allocating the extra economic activity right. And there was a study being published a couple of weeks ago that looked at what the author called wasted GDP. So wasted GDP is basically what you mentioned in your in the way you asked the question, like that proportion of GDP that is wasted because other countries manage to achieve the very same quality of life with such a lower GDP. And if we look at the US, because it's one of the kind of like a poster country for high GDP per capita, we see that there are just 5 countries. So in the study, that's Greece, Spain, Slovenia, Japan, and Cyprus, that managed to achieve the very same level of quality of life with 37% less of GDP. So that leads the author to claim that, you know, 37% of American GDP is actually wasted because it doesn't improve quality of life. And then if you transcribe, like 37% of GDP is a huge chunk of useless activities that are using a lot of energy and resources that we cannot afford to be using because we should be decreasing them. And so putting all of these together, we can start to understand that somehow downscaling these nature-intensive goods and services that are being used most often by those that are the richest, and therefore that have a very low average well-being footprint, is not going to create any major risk. I mean, if anything, it might even improve the situation for the people that are today most vulnerable in these high-income countries. And that is because any ecological transition can be designed with safety nets. I mean, we've talked about guaranteed income, we talked about working time reduction strategies, we talked about guaranteed access to goods and services, and different kind of pricing systems. So for me, there's just a design problem rather than something we should be just fearing or not fearing, like it's decided by the gods.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Patricia. I mean, she did a study on the difference. I mean, we now know that governments are trying to electrify. They're going for renewable energy. They're trying to electrify their transport as a decarbonization strategy, and they're you know, to break their dependency on fossil fuel. But transitioning to electrical vehicles will now need electrical vehicle batteries, which you will need minerals such as lithium, graphite, and cobalt. And I think your agency did a study to compare what it would be like if you did a green growth model, which still goes for growth, and if you did a degrowth model, which is trying to reduce production and go more for the public transport thing. And what were can you share with us your findings?
Yeah, thanks a lot for bringing this aspect up. It's actually it's a super important one, and also very kind of hotly debated one at the moment. The question of critical raw materials needed for the transition and the materials needed for decarbonization. So, I mean, as a network organization, we're obviously, you know, working for, and we've been pushing for, you know, like ambitious decarbonization strategies, you know, we've seen some good successes there, even though, I mean, our ambitions aren't yet high enough in Europe. I mean, we've also shown with other studies, not the one that you mentioned, but other studies, that full decarbonization by 2040 and 100% renewables to 2040 is, you know, economically and socially possible. But you're absolutely right that kind of the new, let's say, global scramble, you know, for critical raw materials is a major concern. As you know, especially like the high-tech economies try to decarbonize as fast as possible. And if you look at the kind of projected volumes of certain raw materials that alone the EU will need, for instance, lithium, you know, in the next decades, if we just continue on the growth trajectory is insane. I mean, just Europe will need more than the whole world needs at the moment in just, you know, a few years from now. So, and it's also a very strong example that shows how, you know, that growth trajectory is spurring new environmental and social conflicts, because we are seeing a new boom in mining, and obviously most of that is happening either in the global south, or it's happening in countries that are in our own periphery, you know, whether that's you know, in the Balkans, far up in the north, in indigenous peoples' territories, in Sub-Miland, or, you know, in rural communities in northern Portugal, which we're ready to sacrifice apparently quite quickly, you know, to get hold of those resources. And what is painfully missing from the current discussion at the moment on critical raw materials at the European level, where we're just, you know, where policymakers are negotiating a critical raw materials act and related strategies, is, you know, what are the kind of solutions that would reduce the demand for virgin raw materials in the first place? I mean, we're mostly talking about how can we make mining more sustainable? How can the EU secure its access to critical raw materials, you know, in a difficult geopolitical situation? We're not really looking at how can we reduce the demand in the first place, which would also, you know, reduce the dependency that we're in for critical raw materials. So what we're missing is a debate, and that's very much linked, you know, to the question of growth or degrowth. For instance, a debate, you know, how many private cars do we need in Europe in order for people to live well and in order for people to be able to move, go to work, go to school, do whatever they need to do? We're not having that debate. We're pretending that we can continue to increase the number of cars on our roads, you know, if they're electric vehicles. And that leads, well, on the one hand, to the problems that I've described in terms of the you know, increase in environmental and social conflict around mining, you know, the global question of equitable use of resources that are obviously limited. There's no global body that, you know, governs how we use raw materials and who uses raw materials globally. And there's no, at this point in time, kind of no political will to set up a global governance structure for raw materials, which means we are going to reproduce existing power imbalances that, you know, that we have seen not only for decades but for centuries. So we very urgently need a discussion, you know, when we talk about decarbonization, also about how we can reduce the demand for critical raw materials, and how we can shift to you know, other forms of transport, for instance, other than private cars. And this debate is not yet happening at a sufficient level, unfortunately.
Thank you. If I can put some questions together, mix them for Timotei, maybe you can answer them all at once. First of all, I mean, degrowth now, which you've said is a planned reduction of excess resource and energy use in high-income countries to bring the economy back into balance with the living world in a just and equitable way. And this concept has now been discussed in major reports in the IPCC and in the European Environment Agency. And now the scholarship is offering some toolbox of ideas and strategies, you know, to develop this further. Can you share with us how degrowth would eradicate these extremes of wealth and poverty that we're seeing, which is causing so much distress and inequality, and obviously leads to conflict, and how degrowth would ensure health care, housing, education, equality? These are all the social equality, things that people need in a normal daily life. What's the strategy of degrowth there?
Well, here, I mean, degrowth is not reinventing the wheel. I mean, the concept is rather young, so it dates back from 2002. So, I mean, to reduce inequality, you don't need degrowth. You just need to, take money from the people that are wealthy and give it to the people that are least wealthy. It's very easy. You can, you have wage inequality. So to limit wage inequality, you have kind of a legal cap, like we have in France in the social and solidarity economy and in certain cooperatives, to be like, no one can earn more within this company than 4 times the minimum wage. You do this, boom, game over. Then you can also, then you move to income. Well, we have progressive taxation of income. Then you just need to set the brackets. Decades of neoliberal ideology has pretty much shrunk in many countries in the world, the taxation of income, but it would be possible also to add a guaranteed minimum income so that no one can actually fall through a threshold of income poverty, and also have very high brackets of income taxation that can go up to 70, 80, 90, even 100%. You can have a cap where after a certain income, let's say that you can just set a ratio between like the median income. You can say anyone earning more than X times the median income will be taxed, 80, 90, whatever percent. And then wealth is most important, but you can have the very same mechanism. And here I'm not even mobilizing the degrowth scholarship. I'm just using Thomas Piketty, participatory socialism a program where you just have what he calls like in the guaranteed inheritance. So it's like a guaranteed income. It's just every citizen at age 25 receive, let's say, 120,000 euros. And that's being financed by taxing, inheritance when people die. And that's just give everyone's like a fair shot. You do this, you just phase out inequality. So here, regardless of growth, and degrowth, which is more like how inequality is going to change based on economic activity over the times, I think we do know what to do to reduce inequality. And then the question of healthcare, housing, education, all of that, public services overall. The interesting thing is actually now, like, if you think of healthcare, why is healthcare expensive? Healthcare is expensive because most of the medicine and the tools, and in certain countries, even the health services themselves, are being provided by for-profit companies in situations of monopoly that just have all political liberties to set high prices. So again, like if we were to declare right now, like Sandrine said, we shoot for fossil fuel, and I completely agree, to be like, no one should profit from, digging for fossil fuel right now. No one should profit from, healthcare and housing and education and all these kind of basic needs. Then we would actually make it cheaper in terms of collective, and we would improve our ability to satisfy collective needs. So I think throughout these kind of broad reflections on post-capitalism and the role of the profit motive in need satisfaction in health, housing, and all of that, we could we can reach much more fundamental conclusions than just asking like where to find the money, and keep expecting these sectors to keep running from a mostly privately owned for-profit mentality.
Thank you. Maybe, I would like maybe for the last question for both of you to respond to this. The growth imperative has shaped the architecture of the modern economy. We can see how difficult it is for governments to let go of this concept, because they look at tax revenue on income, and usually it's the middle income or low income people are actually paying out because they have to, and then the rich people are avoiding tax and they're using tax havens or profit shifting or whatever. But this pursuit of growth in GDP has also had an impact on the psychology and is with the socially divisive thing, but psychology of the people. People are locked into these powerful forces of competition and held at the mercy of social comparison. So it's going to be very difficult to counter and reverse this culture of consumerism, which is now taken over everyone from every level. And you can see why people just buy into this idea of growth, because you're constantly consuming. It's just you're constantly seeing advertising, you're constantly seeing this is you have to do, travel there, it's become cheap, let's go on holiday here. Social media is bringing in wear this, go this, it's like it's country hopping, not island hopping, taking one picture. It's so ingrained into our mindsets now that it's going to be very difficult to sort of tie it back. What do you think needs to be done to sort of get people out of this cancerous materialism that's affecting us so deeply? Anyone?
Okay, I'll try and go first. I mean, I obviously agree with your analysis, that it is, I mean, it is a political problem, but it's also a cultural problem. And so it's not easy to kind of change the narrative around those questions. I mean, I think one problem is also that, I mean, it's difficult to talk, with a wider audience about, the meaning of GDP, the meaning of economic growth, the problems linked to this. It's very abstract, and it's difficult to communicate, and it does sound threatening. So I think everybody who works on degrowth or post-growth is probably involved in an ongoing debate about how to best communicate about these questions with different audiences. I mean, there are different audiences, and different audiences also require different ways of talking about it. But I haven't come across a single organization who or if there is a single organization that has a perfect kind of way of communicating about these questions with a wider audience. I'd be very intrigued to kind of see their communication strategy. Because it is it is a difficult one, but at the same time, I also think, and I can't remember who mentioned that already in the debate, but I mean, there is also a growing understanding that, I mean, of the downsides, also on the individual and the mental health, level of the system that we're locked into. And this is still, I mean, kind of a minority, but it seems to be a growing, group of people that are, adopting different kind of lifestyles, and also sharing those, more publicly. So I think there's at least kind of a seed that has been planted. And then I do believe that there is a very attractive narrative around what it could mean, for us as an individual level, but also as a level of a society, to adopt certain policies that are linked to the wider kind of question of transformation of the economic system, whether that's, for instance, giving more space to, social inclusive businesses. And I mean, there's also a lot of people who are involved in these kind of business models and that need more space, or also, 50% of the world's population are women, and their unpaid care work is worth an estimated $10 trillion a year, and then so I think people can also understand that if we kind of put value differently to work and service provided in our economy, that it's ultimately beneficial for many of us. So I do believe there are very strong narratives, and we need to get them out. We need to continue the work of trying to kind of open up that debate in society, go beyond the circles that currently where these debates are happening at the moment. This circle has already grown much bigger than it was only 5 years ago. I mean, when I started doing the work that I'm doing now, like 6-7 years ago, this debate was still very much at the margins of the political debate, the debate in media, even, I mean, it was there in the academic world, but even there it has grown a lot, so I see that it's moving more to the center of a political debate, at least in our region. So I think there is potential for this narrative to kind of gain even more momentum.
Thank you very much. Timothy, do you have any last thoughts on this?
No, I'll just be very short. I completely agree, and I think it's beautiful to end on this. And I'm also actually very surprised to see how popular these concepts are getting. I mean, I'm a scientist, so I just had to the university and I do research, and and I'm seeing this concept, taking a life of their own, and just so many hybridation between different movements that are just giving rise to these new imaginaries. And I think that's where power lies, in just creating imaginaries of well-being beyond these kind of tales of consumerism and materialism and just money making, which I think people see through. Neither see that those are just false promises. And now it's quite empowering to be able to just regain autonomy over the shaping of your very own future. So that's what's exciting about it.
Thank you very much. I think it's being aware of what's happening and why we're in this situation and how we got here. So it's been a fascinating conversation. I hope everybody else has enjoyed it as much as I have. Perhaps I'd like to end with a few words that Professor Jackson has said, which I think is very interesting. He said that prosperity goes beyond fleeting material pleasures. It transcends material concerns. It resides in the quality of our lives and in the health and happiness of our families. It presents in the strength of our relationships and our trust in the community. It is evidenced by our satisfaction at work and our sense of shared meaning and purpose. It hangs on our potential to participate fully in the life of society. Prosperity consists in our ability to flourish as human beings within the ecological limits of a finite planet. So I think with those beautiful words, I'd like to end this session, and thank you all for taking your time to be with us, and thank you for all the participants who joined us today. Thank you.